Welcome to the Honest Entrepreneur Show, where I'm bringing you tried and tested advice to help your online business without any of the bullshit. Today, I'm talking all about mental health. Mental health is incredibly prevalent in modern society. It's said to impact 1 in 4 of us and is particularly prevalent in the entrepreneurial space. Over 450 million people worldwide are currently, this moment, struggling with their mental health. Entrepreneurship is a bit of a perfect storm often when it comes to mental health. It can be an incredibly lonely, stressful, just hard grind in general. It can come with huge ups and downs, and all of this can cause mental health issues. Often our identity becomes inextricably linked to our work. So when our work does great, we feel great, but when it does badly, we feel terrible. If our work fails, it can literally feel like we're drowning. Whilst I admittedly don't suffer with ongoing serious mental health issues, I believe it does exist on a spectrum, and I've certainly have suffered at points and continue to suffer. So I wanted to share my honest experiences in this area with you guys, with the hope that I hope it helps you to feel less alone. Part of my motivation for doing this episode is the dreaded highlight reel of social media. We all tend to put out our most perfect selves on social media, our curated highlight reel of our lives. And this can often lead to other people feeling inadequate or like they're not quite measuring up. So that is a big motivation behind this episode, just to show the realities of what actually lies behind being an entrepreneur and that kind of rosy exterior. I try to bring as much vulnerability and honesty as I can through the show, of course, but I think we're all guilty of kind of painting a super positive picture on social media. Realize that none of us have this game down and perfected, and that's completely fine. Back in episode 2 of this show, I talked at length about how I actually put myself in hospital through overwork and hustle, and the incredible struggle which I had coming back from this, both physically and mentally. It was absolutely one of the toughest times of my life. I had to use every ounce of fortitude and energy to kind of bring myself through that. I was still there with the physical exterior, I was a wreck, but I was very much trying to cheerlead and push the company along and look after my team and protect the culture that we'd built here. But on the inside, I was so frustrated. I felt like I was locked inside this tomb of a body that just wouldn't respond for what I needed it to do. I felt incredibly scared and depressed at points. I remember just crying out of the frustration, out of the terror, and just how scary it was to think that I'd ruined my life by putting myself in this position. It also put tremendous pressure on my relationships because I became so dependent on those loved ones around me, and I couldn't give anything back. But even outside of that particular horrendous experience, I've struggled with aspects of mental health throughout my career as an entrepreneur. I know that I felt huge amounts of anxiety at certain points. I've literally opened my eyes lying in bed in the morning and had a full-on panic attack at the sheer weight of things to do. I start thinking of one part of my to-do list and it instantly seems to spiral out into a million jobs that all urgently need to happen. And so by me thinking about a fairly innocuous thing on that to-do list, I suddenly felt this incredible burden and weight like physically pressing down upon me because I feel like I just can't cope. There's too much to even know where to start. And I've had it where I've started having one of these panic attacks and my girlfriend has to calm me down and just get me out of that headspace and help prepare me for the day. But it really does kind of incapacitate you. This was particularly bad in the earlier days of Design Cuts because I was doing so many jobs and we hadn't really scaled up a team at this point. So I'd be pulling together all of these deals which were flying and doing really well, but behind the scenes, it was so scrappy and last minute, it would pretty much every time come down to the wire. And because we were doing deals every 2 weeks I felt like I was going to have a heart attack. I was literally there, a nervous, shaking wreck, because it was so stressful and I only just managed to pull it off in the nick of time. And if I didn't, it was all going to fall apart. And this was pretty terrible for my physical and mental health because I just put myself through amazing amounts of anxiety and panic and worry on a regular basis. And, we've got this whole hustle culture thing going on right now. That is not something to admire to. I probably wasn't the happiest when I was in this mode. I probably wasn't thinking as clearly as I should have been in life and business. This is not a place to aspire to want to be because it's like the sexy grinding it out kind of thing that everyone's talking about right now. I also know as an entrepreneur, I feel like I'm on a constant cycle of ups and downs. It's like an absolute roller coaster. It's literally like a 2-week cycle where I go from feeling pumped and elated and hyperactive, almost manic and energetic, and just getting incredible amounts done, to then burning out to a minor extent at least, and then crashing and feeling lethargic and useless and depressed. And this gets compounded because when you're feeling depressed and down like this, you then beat yourself up for feeling down and useless and you should be doing more. I'm certainly not saying I'm bipolar. Some of my best friends in the world are bipolar. I've seen firsthand how incredibly debilitating and severe that can be. But to an extent, it feels like a much, much lesser version of that, where you're just in this cyclical thing where you're stuck, elated and then you're burnt out, elated and burnt out. And it just feels like this hamster wheel, which you really can't get off. I think it kind of stems just from being ambitious, which many entrepreneurs are, because if you're ambitious, you tend to try and overachieve. And so you push and you push and you push and you push too much. And then that comes back to bite you, because that's when your body or your mind crashes, you're sleep deprived or whatever it might be. And that's when you come falling back down to earth. You fall into this little pit of despair, and then you need to pull yourself out of it. Even though I've seen it 1,000 times, I will still have a tendency to fall into this. So I'll fall into the pit of despair, and then I'll kind of pick myself up and find that fortitude inside, and then just plow into the next cycle and think, yeah, I can do it all again. I'm gonna do it right this time. But then I get filled with so much energy and passion that I then overextend and I push it too far, and the whole cycle repeats again. I also think that being an entrepreneur is the fastest way to become an existentialist. And this is fantastic for building self-awareness and even confidence, but you constantly find yourself asking questions like, am I really 100% happy? Am I doing what I was absolutely put on this earth to do? Could I be doing even better? What is success? And this really can lead to you bouncing around inside your own head, which can then fill you with the loneliness and the bleakness and just second guessing why you even exist at all. So I don't want to put too much of a downer on today's episode. I think it's important to talk about this stuff, to share the stuff which we all go through. But what can you do? Firstly, as with any mental health in life, I think talking about it is so important. I know I've leaned on loved ones around me a lot, and I've also confided in my business partners and even my team, and I encourage all of them to do the same. I think you need to shift that stigma, and thankfully that seems to gradually be happening within society. But it's so important that people feel able to talk about this stuff. And it's something I'm always going to encourage in those around me as well. After having the horrendous experience of the major surgery and the chronic illness, I was struggling so much, and I did actually go and see a therapist for a year just to pull myself out of it. And she almost had to reprogram my brain, because at this point I was in such a low place, but also I was such a workaholic. I'd programmed myself with that hustle mentality where that's all I knew. And I remember her saying to me quite regularly that I seemed to be obsessed with giving value and trying to help other people, but I completely lacked any self-compassion. So simply being human or having an off day or struggling with something, I would then beat myself up massively because I wasn't perfect all the time. I truly would recommend therapy to just about anyone, because I think it can really, really help personally and in business. Self-awareness is huge as well. I try to now recognize when I'm going into one of these cycles, when I feel particularly manic and I'm there doing 15 things at once, and all I want to do is drink coffee and work through the night and not sleep and just hustle. I know what comes next, and I know it's just not worth it. So I will try and just rein it in and try and hold myself back and be like, nope, it can wait until tomorrow. I'm going to go get some rest, some sleep. I'm going to try and have some downtime, even though every fiber of my being is like, I want to run with this thing and just execute. I know that's not the best long-term play. Same thing goes for when I'm feeling quite low. I might feel like a complete piece of shit, but I also can now tell myself, I've seen this 100 times before. I know that isn't true. I know this will pass, because it always tends to. What this means is I tend to operate in a more kind of safe middle ground. So I'm not on the massively extreme highs, and the lows aren't as extreme either. And this does feel quite frustrating at points, because it feels like you're numbing yourself almost. You want to feel, those extreme feelings, particularly the highs. But I realize I can't have the ridiculous extreme highs without also getting the ridiculous extreme lows. So for me, it's more sustainable to have like kind of nice highs and then the lows aren't too bad either. And that's more of the kind of running a marathon instead of trying to sprint a marathon. Finally, experience massively helps within the business arena for me. So I remember in the early days, anything would go wrong that was kind of a big problem. Our server would crash, or there was a customer nightmare or something like that. And I would literally freak out because I hadn't seen it all before. I remember if I couldn't physically fix it myself, it might be waiting on the dev team or tech support or something, I would be nervously pacing up and down the office, making our early team at the time probably quite nervous. I'd be biting my fingernails and I'd just be going round and round in my head, like hyperventilating, and it would feel terrible. I'd just work myself into this absolute sweat. And when you have more experience, I've now seen hundreds of scenarios like this. As we've scaled out, these scenarios only get more regular. And so pretty much every day I will walk into some kind of fire happening with my company. And I recognize as CEO, that's normal. I'll walk into a pretty big problem, at least one every single day. And most of the time, the team don't know about it. And that's cool. Or maybe one of them knows about it and comes to me, however it might work. And it's my job to try and tackle those behind the scenes and keep the ship going in the right direction. And if I freaked out every time a problem happened, I would never get anything done. So I've had to kind of mature from that kid who would panic over every little thing going wrong to being like, you know what, it's probably going to be fine because we've dealt with worse over the years. And I think of something 4 years ago that was similar and we got through that. So I know this time around I'm going to be fine. And that unfortunately only seems to come with experience. For anyone who is watching or listening, I don't want to detract with what you're going through. I'm sure for some of you, it is incredibly serious with your mental health, far beyond anything which I could imagine. So I don't just want to say, experience and developing a thick skin are the answer. I realize often you cannot think your way out of these situations. However, I think definitely talking to those loved ones around you and having that support network is always going to be a positive thing. I think as well, realizing that you are normal, if there is such a thing, and that you're not a freak, you're not an outcast because you're struggling with this stuff, because statistics tell us that it is entirely normal for people to be going through this stuff. Just realize that if you are going through this stuff, you are certainly not any less, you're not any weaker because of it. As I say, myself, so many entrepreneurs struggle with anxiety, depression, so many of these things. They are incredibly prevalent, but also realize that as an entrepreneur, taking that leap of faith, that takes tremendous courage and strength and bravery. And I've got so much respect for you at home watching or listening to this because of that. Definitely not a professional in this space. I'm just sharing my own honest experiences. But yeah, if you need to talk to someone, absolutely go and do that. I know it massively has helped me at points. And on that note, thank you so much for watching and listening today. I realize it's been a bit more of a perhaps serious episode than normal, but I think it's super important to address this subject. I don't want anyone out there to feel alone who's struggling with this stuff. Please do, if you feel comfortable, feel free to share your experiences in the comments below. I know often people, do benefit from being able to relate to others on this stuff, so I hope that you will. Thank you so much as always, guys. I really appreciate you, and I will see you next time. Hey, thanks so much for watching this episode. Really, really appreciate you being here with me. If you haven't yet, please do subscribe right here on YouTube. Remember, tick the little bell icon so that you get proper notifications. I really hope you're enjoying the show. I hope you'll stick around for the upcoming episodes. I really want to keep bringing you as much value as possible. So thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you guys soon.